All right, welcome back. This is our week 11 stuff. We're looking at chapters 9 and 10, which is about money, pretty much. So we're going to talk about some definitions of money, talk about exchange rates for money, and really build our way towards monetary policy, which we've mentioned in previous chapters. So let's do it. Let's just jump in. So, chapter 9, demanders and suppliers of money. So, when we're talking about money, we're going to start with the concept of the demand for money. This is a little bit different from what we think of in terms of what's called money supply, which we've kind of talked about earlier when we did the equation of exchange. Remember the M times V is equal to P times Q. For this one, we're going to do a slightly different framework. And so this is a little bit more recent than that quantity theory, which goes back a few hundred years. This demand for money concept comes from mostly from Keynes, again, because he invented macroeconomics pretty much. When we talk about money, money has to have a few different functions to properly be considered money. And so the first one it's got to be a medium of exchange, which means that we are going to be able to exchange it for other goods. So I go to a Starbucks, I order a cup of coffee. Can I pay with US dollar bills? Not really, right? It's highly unlikely that they're going to accept them. Can I use an American credit card? Sure, because that'll do the conversion. But if I give them American cash, not really going to work, right? Even if the American cash is worth a premium over the Canadian cash, right? Because one American dollar is worth more than one Canadian dollar. So say I buy a cup of coffee that costs me $3, and I give somebody a $5 American dollar bill, I'm still going to get refused. So it's not going to work particularly well as medium of exchange. So what this looks like in the 21st century is a little bit different than what it's looked like in previous centuries. So think about something like, I want to go buy a new car, and I've got a flock of sheep. Does a flock of sheep work reasonably well as a medium of exchange? Can I say, hey, listen, I want to buy that, maybe not a car, maybe a wagon. I want to buy that wagon. I've got, a dozen sheep here, and, maybe they'll say, oh, I'll sell it for 15 sheep. Okay, 15. Let's meet in the middle. How about 14 sheep? Well, I could do 14. Let me get two more from the barn or whatever. We can do it that way, and so in that way, it counts as a medium exchange because people are willing to accept sheep hundreds of years ago. Maybe not today. Probably not. If you tried to buy a cup of coffee with some sheep, even if the sheep was worth a lot, or were worth a lot, it's not really going to work, right? So an accepted medium exchange. This solves something called the double coincidence of wants. That's an idea of a world without money. And a world without money would look strange, just to think about it. But the idea of double coincidence of wants is, I want a cup of coffee. What does the barista want, or what does the coffee shop owner want? That makes it a little bit easier. I go to a privately run coffee shop. There's only one person who's there. They own the shop. They can negotiate. And at the end of the day, what can we barter, right? I can give them some math tutoring or some econ tutoring, or I can help their kid pass an exam or something in exchange for a cup of coffee. So I have to be somebody who wants what they have, which is coffee, sure, but they also need to want what I have, which is pretty specific. I can't do much else. I'm not very good at anything else. So it doesn't really follow that these interactions are going to happen very often. Now, occasionally, you do see that kind of stuff. Call that a quid pro quo. You do something for me, I do something for you. And that type of exchange, again, is very dependent on knowing the other party, getting to meet that other party. The transaction costs involved in having that work for something like I need a haircut, or I need a car, or I need to, pay my for my Netflix account. That's not going to work very well outside of something like money. So the types of exchanges long time ago wouldn't be nearly as complex as what we have today, and we're able to facilitate that through money. Okay, so Let's stick with the sheep. Does it hit the other two that we like? The unit of account. Right, unit of account. Unit of account. Well, the example I just gave, 14 sheep for that car or wagon or whatever, that works, So the sheep are looking pretty good here as money. They're checking off this. They're checking off this. Doesn't have a store of value. Well, this is where things get tricky. Suppose I wanted to buy that car a few months from now, and I decided to, put those sheep in storage. I put them into a vault. 6 months later, if I check in on them for the first time, they're not going to be nearly as valuable as they were when I put them in there because, they won't be alive and all that stuff. So, does the potential money rot if you leave it alone? And if the answer is yes, then it's potentially a bad store of value. Now, it can be a good store of value if you maintain it, right? If you feed the sheep, you keep the sheep happy. But then you suddenly have what we would call like a storage cost. So that's kind of tricky, right? So the idea here for what makes for good money is that you want it to kind of satisfy all of these. And so you want something that will not fall apart if you leave it alone, so it'll make a good store of value. You want it to be something where you can measure it effectively. And you want it something that's generally accepted. So what are some examples of things that actually satisfy this outside of Canadian dollars? And my favorite example has always been, how about cigarettes? Cigarettes. Am I spelling cigarettes right? I think I am. I'm not sure. So the most famous case for this was cigarettes in POW camps. Now this is just an old example. Now back during say World War II, POW is a prisoner of war. If you get captured and you're held behind enemy lines as a prisoner, the general idea is you get these care packages in the mail. Let's just say once a month. And so a care package once a month would be kind of nice. You get letters from your loved ones. You get a bar of chocolate, let's say, and then you get a pack of cigarettes. And the idea is the prisoners of war were actually able to use the cigarettes as a form of money within this camp. Because at the end of the day, are people willing to accept it as a form of payment? Now, payment for what? Well, like I said, we got chocolate arriving in this care package as well. Could you buy somebody's chocolate with cigarettes? And the answer is sure, right? Generally, though, for it to be something that works, the reason people want to accept it is something called intrinsic value. And intrinsic value is the idea that the money itself has value outside of being used as money. So what's the value of a cigarette? Simple. People like to smoke them because it makes you look cool and it calms your nerves and makes you apparently makes you smarter too. I didn't know that, but I just found that out recently. It gives you a little intellectual boost. That could be really useful, maybe. I don't know. People value it though. People value it, and so people would be willing to accept it if they smoke. But then let's try and think this, one step further. When else would you be willing to accept it? If you don't smoke, would you be willing to accept cigarettes as a form of payment? So if somebody offers to buy chocolate off of you, and they offer you cigarettes, but you don't smoke, is it worth doing? Well, it depends. What else can the cigarettes be used for? If they're just useful for buying chocolate, that's not particularly helpful. But suppose that, let's say there's hard labor you have to do in the POW camp. So you've got labor you have to do. You have to break rocks or whatever, dig holes, who knows. If you could pay somebody in cigarettes to do that for you, well, cigarettes have now multiple uses. You can buy chocolate, you can get work done, have somebody else do your work for you. I mean, these are things that give it value. But at the end of the day, the person that's going to accept it, we would expect to be somebody who smokes or believes that they could sell it to somebody else who smokes. And this is where the store of value part comes in as being really important. Reason is, if the cigarettes don't go bad, it can take quite a bit of time until somebody buys it and actually smokes them. But if you buy it, you know that eventually somebody will be able to smoke it. And so that fundamentally is important for money having value. Somebody has to be willing to consume it. But it doesn't have to be the person that accepts the money. So I'd be willing to get paid in cigarettes even though I don't smoke, because I know somewhere down the line those cigarettes are going to be smoked by somebody. That gives it intrinsic value in the future, and because it doesn't go bad, it gives it value today as well. And this allows us to do some interesting thought experiments, right? What happens when, let's say, you're stuck in this POW camp for a while, but for whatever reason, nobody smokes. You just happen to get a group of people who don't smoke, period. Now, this is the 1940s in this example, so it's unlikely, but let's just say it happened to be the case. Would you still be willing to receive cigarettes as a payment for, let's say, chocolate? Right? The chocolate you might value, you might actually consume it, but you get paid in cigarettes. What value do they have if nobody in the camp smokes? Well, at the end of the day, in this war, people are getting captured all the time, so it's possible that in the future somebody will get captured, enter the POW camp, and they will be a smoker. Well, then at that point, the cigarettes have value today because they will have value in the future when this person arrives, with some probability, with some likelihood. But if you think about it, if the likelihood of that person is kind of uncertain, well, think about it. Maybe originally it was 5 cigarettes for a bar of chocolate, right? Again, that unit account works really well for cigarettes because you can have a pack of smokes, you can have a carton of smokes, you can have individual cigarettes. That's pretty handy. But suppose originally chocolates were, a bar of chocolate was 5 cigarettes. But if the demand for money starts to decline because you don't know if anyone's actually going to be smoking, because you don't know when the next prisoner of war is going to show up and they happen to be a smoker, it might be less likely for you to be willing to take that cigarette as payment for chocolate. So maybe you'll say, you know what, I'll sell this chocolate, but I'm going to take 10 cigarettes for it, or 15 cigarettes for it, because it's a little riskier for me to hold on to this asset that I'm not so sure about it being valuable for much longer, or at all, if we don't have somebody show up to consume it. Because remember, at the end of the day, you got these care packages coming in every month, and those have more cigarettes in them. And it's going to be kind of tough to have that one person arrive, months later and smoke 500 cigarettes or something. So that's in mind. A decrease in the demand for money causes the value of money to decline. In this case, cigarettes, or the inverse of the value of money is the price level. So if the demand for money falls, the price level rises. A chocolate used to sell for 5 cigarettes, now it sells for 15 because the value of money has declined in this little example. And I think that's pretty much it. Now, we don't really use cigarettes as a form of money at all anymore, right? A few different reasons, right? The demand for cigarettes declines over time. People smoke less. At the end of the day, they're an okay store of value, right? You put it in your pocket, it's going to be serviceable in the future, but really it's not ideal. And we don't really like it so much because anybody can ramp up the production whenever they want. Like in the prisoner of war example, they're scarce, right? They're coming in ever so infrequently and they're consumed. There's some scarcity associated with it. In real life, pretty easy to ramp up production for cigarettes if the demand goes up. So it's not going to make particularly good money in the real world, which is why I like to instead talk about something like gold. Is gold a store of value? Gold is an excellent store of value because gold is one of those metals that does not rust and does not tarnish. You take gold, you put it in a vault. 500 years from now, you open that vault, the gold's going to be exactly the same, pretty much. Unit of account. Can you cut a bar of gold in half? Yes. If you melt it down and put it back together, do you get the original bar of gold back? Yes. Gold is an excellent unit of count. And that gets us to the last point, medium of exchange. Does gold have intrinsic value? And sure enough, the answer is it does. Gold is shiny. I spelled that very poorly. Gold is shiny. Shiny and sparkly, and for whatever reason, people seem to be attracted to it. They think it looks nice. Maybe not today, maybe not now. I mean, gold's not necessarily super popular. My wedding ring is not gold because I think gold is hideous. My dad's wedding ring is gold because, for whatever reason, people seem to like the look of gold a few decades ago. But I think gold is hideous. I think gold is gaudy and ugly. I actually have a gold ring that was given to me by my grandfather. I've never worn it because I think it looks ugly. But I still hold on to it. I don't throw it in the garbage because I know somebody else will value it at some point in the future. And it doesn't have to be any point, near in the future, again, because the gold doesn't go bad. And you know what? People are still going to be alive decades from now, hundreds of years from now, thousands of years from now. People are still going to think that shiny things are nice. And so that's interesting, the idea that gold will have value in perpetuity, which is different from some other things, right? Like certain things are more fashionable than others. I had a student, where was it? I had a student last year who was like, "Hey, Mike, let's talk." We were talking about Bitcoin, and we were talking about stuff on eBay. And he was like, "Mike, can you look up Pokemon cards, which are, Pokemon's this game?" And he's like, "Yeah, my dad got really into this back in the late 90s. He bought a bunch of these. And what you can do is you can look up sold items." Okay, there's one. I don't know what this is. I don't really know Pokemon. My sister played with Pokemon cards when she was a kid. But if I go highest price, there we go. I have no idea what this is. There you go. There's a good one. Oh, there's a rare one for $17,000. Neat. So here's a bunch that are very, very, very expensive. There you go. Sure. $19.99, $10,000. What do you get for this? Right? Well, the thing about this one is it's worth $10,000. Obviously, it's got intrinsic value. Somebody looks at it and values it. Now, like I said with the POW example, there might be, POW camp filled with dozens of people that don't smoke, but as long as one person values it, I'll be willing to accept it as payment. Somebody values this. I don't think this is. I mean, I wouldn't buy it for any dollar unless I knew I could resell it to somebody who wants to pay $10,000 for it. That's the weird part about this. Here's the thing, though. What's going to happen to this value of this over time? Right? Gold winds up being shiny forever. People like shiny things, but something like this. What's interesting about the Pokemon stuff is it's been 20 years. And the people that were kids back then, say they were 10, now they're 30, they got a bunch of money. You see this with nostalgic properties where they become much more valuable 20 years or 30 years after they were popular when people were kids. So people spend tons of money to revisit their childhoods. The thing is, this doesn't have nearly the same meaning to somebody who's a kid today. So will this be worth $10,000 years from now? I think it's an interesting question. I don't want to go overboard, but you can do this with all sorts of things. One of the neatest ones was that same student. That's right. That same student had been buying these things called Lego Millennium Falcons, which is something from Star Wars. And let me sort by price. So, oh, come on. There we go. Here you go. So, this thing came out like 10 years ago. They cost $500. And they made like a limited run, and then they started selling for let me see, 10179, 101 10179, and I'm gonna do sold. So these things were selling for a lot of money. These things were selling for like several $1,000s. I mean, there's a wide variety of prices. None of these are sold. Let's see how much they're selling for now. Okay, so selling for $2,000. So those $8,000 asks don't actually match what they actually sell for. But sure enough, these things were selling for $6,000, $7,000 American just a few years ago. And so what do you get for it? You get a box of plastic, box of this toy. I don't have a good picture of it here, but you get a box of this thing. And yeah, you can, open it up, blah blah blah. It's all well and good, but here's what's funny about it. This thing was selling for thousands of dollars. So what did Lego do? Lego, Millennium Falcon, reissue. They just made a new one. 75192. 75192. 75192. This thing, guess what? You can buy it at the store right now. You can go to Toys R Us. No, not Toys R Us. There's a Lego store right by campus at the mall. You can buy one of these right now. So what did that do to the value of the original one, the one that came out 10 years ago? It destroyed it, right? I mean, it's still worth a bunch, obviously. Right? You can get one for $2,000, $3,000, or you can sell it for that much. But it dropped precipitously compared to what it used to be worth. And that's because, guess what? Lego can make these whenever they want. Just like that example I gave about cigarettes, right? You can ramp up production. This thing's only rare in a kind of abstract sense. But here's where it gets interesting. If you buy this, what is the purpose of this? Oh, this one didn't even sell. This one got relisted. That's not quite right. So this thing, what do you get, right? You buy a box, and it's got stuff in it. You can shake it. You can hear the pieces, the Lego pieces rattling around. You can feel the weight to it. But here's the thing: what happens to the value of this thing if you open the box? If you open the box, now it's no longer sealed, and so it instantly loses a ton of its value, right? Because now the person who buys it doesn't know how legitimate it is, doesn't know whether it's been handled already. And so these things, to retain their value, they stay in a closed box, in a sealed box. But what's the purpose of these things, right? What is the intrinsic value? And with cigarettes, you smoke them. With gold, you can melt them into jewelry. With gold, they're useful in like electronic circuitry as well. They have intrinsic value. What is the intrinsic value of something like this? And the answer is, of course, that you open it and build it, or you give it to your kid, or 16 and up. You give it to your kid, or you open it and you build it. A buddy of mine actually owned this thing. He bought it brand new, and guess what he did? He opened it and built it, and he had a great time. Sure, right, whatever. But if you hold on to it as an investment, does it ever actually get to do its intrinsic value? And the answer is potentially no. Now, I actually bought something from when I was a kid to give to my kid. So I bought it. It was mint and sealed box. It cost like $100. And guess what we did? I was like, you know what? Open it up. Here you go. So I bought it and I opened it. And at the end of the day, he got something that I thought was neat. I paid a lot of money for it, but I don't really care. But it fulfilled, what you can kind of think of as its purpose. A kid played with it. Here's what's interesting about this. You own this. Notice that's all gray plastic. What does gray plastic do over decades? I don't know if you have any old electronics, but plastic tends to lose its color. Occasionally, it starts to turn yellow over time. So think about that. You own this thing, and over time, it becomes yellow on the inside. Like the plastic degrades. But because it's sealed, you can't actually tell. And so now there's a fear that what you actually have, and it doesn't happen to all of them. It's random. Sometimes they'll stay perfect, and sometimes they'll decay, and you don't know until you open the box. But at the end of the day, if you were to open it and it's ugly, wouldn't you have been better off buying the new, cheaper reissue? And so the value decays over time if you open it, or you don't really know. It's almost like what's that cat example? Anyways, either way, Schrodinger's cat. So it's a weird one, but I'll tell you what my student did. He knew that this thing increased in value quite a bit, and so where's the new one? I'm having a hard time with this. This one here, the reissue. He went and bought 6 of them. He bought 6 of them for like $700 Canadian each, and he's expecting to make some money. And he bought them maybe 3 years ago when they first came out, and he's sitting on it, waiting for it to increase in value, and it's still available at the Lego store. So why would anyone ever buy it from him out of his garage instead of the Lego store? They never would unless they were up to get it at a discount. So he's lost a bunch of money. And think about the carrying costs of that, the storage costs of that. This takes up space, physical space. This is a huge box. It takes up, it's like 2 feet by 2 feet by 2 feet or something stupid. It's a very weird thing to think about, especially considering it's going to be a ticking time bomb, losing its value slowly if it's never actually opened and built, because again, like I said, it rots. That makes me think of something called the Zimbabwe dollar, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But I'm not telling you all these weird, this very bizarre little story for no reason, even though I'm still on the first slide of our notes. So, before I move on to the next slide, I want to do one last example, and that's something called Bitcoin. Okay, so Bitcoin, you can buy a single Bitcoin for $12,000. You can see here. Let me see if I'll just go to CoinDesk. So you can figure out the price of Bitcoin right here. Oh, where is it? Bitcoin price. There we go. So this is American dollars, so $9,000 American. Let's go back in time. Let's do as far back as we can here. So you could buy Bitcoin 7 years ago for $152 each. Sure, $120 there. And then at some point on the way up, it was selling for $19,000 American. I just saw there. So just about $20,000 per Bitcoin. What is a Bitcoin for? Well, does it work as money? Okay, so it's a store of value. Is one Bitcoin always a Bitcoin? Yeah, it's a piece of data. That's reasonable. Unit of account. Can you divide it in half? Absolutely. You can divide it any way you want. So it works very well. Medium exchange. Well, does it satisfy our criteria here? And the answer is sort of, right? Because can people be willing to accept Bitcoin? Sure. But I was thinking about this strange story. Even earlier than this, I remember you can get a Bitcoin for like a few dollars, right? So there was this one guy who had a Bitcoin, and it was worth $10. This is even earlier than the data here, so Bitcoin goes back even earlier than 2013. So a Bitcoin that would be worth $10. At one point, this pizza shop nearby, started accepting Bitcoin. Hey, we accept Bitcoin as payment for pizza. And this guy said, well, the Bitcoin comes out to exactly the same price as a pizza. Whatever. That's what Bitcoin is for. It's supposed to be a type of digital currency. Well, what's money for? Money is for purchasing goods and services. So this guy bought a pizza with that Bitcoin. And so I asked you the question, was it a good idea? Right? Was it a good idea? A good idea to buy a pizza with 1 Bitcoin? So where do Bitcoin come from? Well, you get a computer and you use a lot of electricity to solve some problem, some math problem, and it crunches those numbers, and once it does enough work, it spits out a Bitcoin. Now, that single Bitcoin can't be copied, it can't be forged, there's no way of mass producing them, like there's no way of printing them easily for a government. And for that reason, that kind of scarcity piece I talked about with the cigarettes, that the idea there is it gives it, in a sense, well, some people perceive it to have value. And as long as some people perceive it to have value due to its scarcity, just like people perceive this to have value, even though you might think this is worthless. I mean, I don't like Star Wars, so I'd never buy this. As long as others perceive this to be valuable, maybe it's a good investment. Or maybe it's good to own it, especially if you can make them. If you make them and sell them, like with Bitcoin, maybe it's a good idea, even if you don't plan on using them yourself to buy stuff. But as long as people believe Bitcoin has value, it makes sense to own it, especially if people start outbidding each other for it. Here's the thing. Is it a good idea, or was it a good idea, to buy a pizza with a Bitcoin? When Bitcoin was worth $10. And so there's 2 ways of answering this, and it's going to depend on this term in econ called ex ante and ex post. Ex ante is before the transaction occurred, was this a good idea? And ex post is after the transaction occurred, was this a good idea? Ex post, you look at this and you say, well, it turns out that pizza cost him $20,000. If he had not bought that pizza and instead held on to the Bitcoin, the value of the Bitcoin would have skyrocketed to $20,000. He could have sold it then, and it would have been a very, very good idea. So ex post, was it a good idea to sell to sell the Bitcoin for a pizza? No. Ex ante, though, was it a good idea? Sure, why not? Right? Why wouldn't it have been a good idea to buy to buy a pizza with a Bitcoin if Bitcoin is worth $10? The problem now is, if you make this purchase with the Bitcoin, you're going to regret it, right? That guy buying the pizza probably kicking himself now, even if it was a good idea at the time. And so what does that do for future transactions? If anyone here, where Bitcoin's worth $9,000, decides to spend a Bitcoin to buy something worth buy a car with a Bitcoin, do you want to not buy the car because the Bitcoin can ramp back up, right? Look at how it moves. It moves, crashes down, shoots back up, crashes down, shoots back up. 9,000 there, 4,000 there, 9,000 again. If you own this, does it make sense to use it as money? And if the answer is no, because you want to hold on to it as an investment, well, then it doesn't make particularly good money because nobody's buying and selling them. So this makes things really tricky when talking about why Bitcoin is worth anything. And one of the reasons that Bitcoin has value over traditional currencies is that it's a little bit more untraceable. And so Bitcoin has a lot of value on the black market. So if you want to buy drugs, if you want to buy, assassinations, you want to buy all sorts of other weird stuff, this is done through Bitcoin. So Bitcoin has an advantage over currency in kind of a fourth, well, I guess it'd be medium exchange at the end of the day, right? Because it's untraceable, it gives it some twist of the value compared to something like a dollar or, yen or the pound or the euro or whatever. But again, it's an interesting way of thinking about this. Okay, that's a lot for one slide, so I'm just cut it here and then come pick up again right after. Okay. All right. Thanks for listening for this little thing. Again, it sounds very all over the place. And that's just because this is the culmination of a bunch of examples that have kind of cooked up or percolated up over the years of me talking about this stuff. And it all, though sounding kind of weird, relates back to the course material at the end of the day. Okay, all right, thanks for listening to that.